Greetings, everyone. My name is Sarah Barnes, and on behalf of Campbell & Company, I'd like to welcome you to Fundraising Communications number 1, Defining Our Case for Support. And this is the second of our 2017-2018 webinar series. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly review some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. And to ensure the best experience possible, you can follow these 4 tips: close any programs other than GoTo that are running on your computer. Call in using a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. Move your cell phone away from your computer, and if you experience any visual issues, you can send a chat to Campbell Company. You may also contact GoToWebinar at 1-800-263-6317. Today's webinar will last 60 minutes, and you will earn 1 continuing education credit, and that is good for certification with CFRE International. About an hour after the webinar, you will receive an email with information on how to download your certificate, as well as how to access the presentation on YouTube. So with that, I would like to formally hand it over to Andy. Andy, welcome.
Hello. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, broadcasting from the Campbell & Company webinar studio cave here in Chicago. I just feel like I need to say that right now the rest of our company here in Chicago is over in the other room having a delicious taco lunch that I'm not invited to because we scheduled the webinar at the same time. So somebody over there had better be saving me some of that. No, we have some new employees joining this week, so we're welcoming them and scheduled at the same time. Anyway, today is the first webinar in a series that we'll be doing throughout the rest of this year. It's called Fundraising Communications, and it's really all about this larger question of how we tell our story in a fundraising context. So, this is a question that we see organizations struggle with in various ways, and sometimes it feels like the fundraisers, the fundraising staff is looking for the communication solutions that they need, and the communications or marketing staff may not have the direct connection to the fundraising needs. So there's this kind of niche in the middle where fundraising meets communications, and that's really where my work lives, the work of our communications team at Campbell & Company. That's what we're doing every day. So through this webinar series, we're going to share with you some of the ways that we actually work with our clients day to day. Pretty much everything you're going to see is either from client work or from specific approaches that we use over and over in projects. So I'm really reflecting the work of our communications team. There are 10 of us in Chicago and Seattle who do this work day to day. And so the series is 5 webinars. Today's the first one, all about defining your case for support. This lays the foundation for the series. You'll see the other topics here. We go from defining the case for support to thinking about, okay, once we know what we're trying to communicate, how do we express it? That's what crafting your message is about, the second session. Third session is all about bringing your volunteers in so that they can be good ambassadors and they can be on message. The fourth session is all about materials, especially for major donors. When you're approaching large donor cultivation, what kinds of print materials, presentation materials, different interactive formats, what are organizations doing today that makes it easier to go out and raise money? The fifth session is kind of a special focus topic all about campaigns. So we're going to talk about what are the unique communications challenges and case development challenges of campaigns, and how does that sort of weave together a lot of the content from the other webinars into the specific context of a campaign. So we're excited to be getting back into the swing of things with these webinars. We do this every year, and we update them every year. And it's just a chance to share how our team is working with clients these days. And really hope you'll join us for the whole series. So to jump right in, we'll be going through a lot of content today, rather than trying to field questions. I mean, if we have some time at the end, we'll take some questions. What I'd really like to do is just take your questions, send them in either through the GoToWebinar thing or email, and we'll answer them next week in a video, which will give me a chance to actually think and maybe say something a little more useful. All right, so let's start by talking about what do we mean when we say your case for support? Just a quick kind of working definition for us here. This is part of the jargon and the vocabulary of fundraising, but it's not, I don't know, it's not that self-explanatory, to be honest. You'll hear it confused with sort of your case statement, which is a document, or your case for support, which is more about the set of ideas you're trying to express, or just this kind of general sense, your board members saying, well, I don't get what our case is, or I don't know what's the case that we're trying to communicate. So just a quick working definition for us, that your case for support, you can think about it as the set of messages that you're communicating to prepare prospects for a solicitation. So it's not a specific document, or it doesn't have to be. It's really about a set of ideas, a value proposition, kind of what you're trying to convey. What's your pitch? What's your key talking points? That can take a lot of different forms, but and the goal is really to bring someone along so that they're ready to be asked. Looking at this slide, I'm wondering, does this look a little too ransom notey? I'm asking Sarah. We have new company branding here. This is my first time applying it to the slides.
It's like hitting code.
Yeah, no, it should be at least a little bit ransomy.
I think so.
Just not too much. Anyway, we're figuring out our new colors. So your case, the way we're going to organize the rest of this session, the case has basically 3 jobs to do. And you can think about this in terms of kind of meeting your prospective donor where they are, and then bringing them in, building their trust, building their engagement, and then ultimately, like I said, preparing them for an ask. So you have to engage and inspire them, sort of hook, get their attention at the beginning. You have to create the rationale, create that, not necessarily the reason for that we think they should give, but the sort of rationale that will exist in their mind as to why they would give. And then finally, you need to remove obstacles, because anyone who's been out there fundraising, you know that it doesn't really take much to kind of get hung up on in a donor conversation. One little question that's bugging them, or one little objection they have to something you're doing, any little thing can kind of put a pause or put a hitch in the overall relationship, or your progress toward a solicitation. So part of the job of the case is to anticipate those kinds of things and try to remove them. So the rest of this webinar is really going to be organized around these 3 jobs. So before we jump into that, I just want to make sort of a broader, I guess, my own case to you for why you should care about this. Like, why should you spend time and energy on working on your case for support? We tend to find when we start working with organizations that even very sophisticated, very successful, very well-established fundraising programs, even in the highest performing programs, there's still usually room to improve, or room to think more deeply about the case for support. Part of that is because it's not really anybody's job. Like, there's no, you have major gift officers whose job is major gifts. You have database people whose job is the database. You don't have a person who has the case in their job title, or even probably in their job description. Nobody quite owns it in most organizations. And, apart from, me and some, the people on our team, like, there's not that many people out there who really day-to-day focus on case for support. So it's this thing that we all need, but that in most fundraising programs doesn't really quite live anywhere or assigned to anyone. So I guess what that means to me is that if you want to have a strong case, it's not just going to happen on its own. It's not just somebody's job already. Like, you have to kind of make a deliberate decision to focus on it. So we're going to try to make the case for why you should do that. And throughout this webinar, you'll see I have several dumb illustrations for you. Here's one. So your case for support drives your fundraising machine. We think about everything that needs to go into a fundraising program. You have the staffing, the systems, the volunteer side, your whole donor engagement and relationship management apparatus. There's so much that needs to come together. But the heart and soul of it, the electricity that powers that whole machine, is your case for support. It kind of drives everything. It's why your donors would pay attention and become engaged. It's why your volunteers ultimately are showing up and volunteering their time, because they're invested in the case for your organization. Even on the staffing side, I think a lot of us who have chosen careers in the nonprofit sector, when you start talking about the case for support, you're also, to some extent, talking about why we do our jobs, why we choose these careers, which are challenging in a variety of ways. So it's just useful to remember when we're talking about the case for support, you're getting to the heart of why nonprofits exist, why people care about them. It's not just why a donor should give. It's why we care about the organization as well. And it's giving us the challenge of trying to express that. And that's why we see, when you get your case right, usually someone in the room will cry. It might be your board members, it might be your staff, because they care too. So we're getting to the heart of what drives a fundraising program. The other reason we think you should care about this and focus on it is because it can really yield profound results. It's hard to know sometimes if your case is not working because you're raising money, gifts are coming in, things are fine. If you're taking good care of people, if you're building relationships, you'll get gifts. But there's a higher level for gifts that are really driven by a profound engagement with your case. You see this especially when you go into campaigns. You have people who are already giving at some level and they're already bought in. But if you can make a case to them that's above and beyond and different than, that makes a case for why they should give above and beyond their current giving, they can go up in their giving by an order of magnitude. And that's really kind of how campaigns work, basically. So it's this investment you can make that can make all of your fundraising activities more successful. And it's not terribly expensive, really. I mean, you can do it in-house with your own time and energy. Printing a compelling case document versus an uncompelling one, it doesn't cost more money. It's just the time and energy you have to put into it. And finally, you can do it. I'm not trying to be inspirational here. The point is, this is doable. You have to put in time. You have to think about it. There's a series of questions you want to ask yourself, but it's not magic. It doesn't require some specialized, rarefied skill set to answer the core questions. So this is what the challenge we're putting out to you is to take the time, bring the people together, think deep about your organization, and we're going to try to help you to do that. Once you have that case for support, then it's the foundation for all kinds of different things that you can do. You have that core message, that set of messages to prepare people for a solicitation. Everything else you want to communicate in your fundraising program is kind of running downhill once you have that. Your annual appeals, speeches, videos, social media, training your board members to be good advocates. And first and foremost, you see this at the top of the slide, going into donor conversations, going in with a strong case, the messages in your mind and in your heart that you know how to communicate. It makes everything a little bit easier and more compelling. One thing you'll notice is that I haven't used the word case statement yet to refer to what we're doing in this session. And I just want to make a point of clarification about that. So case statement is traditionally, this is the format that people traditionally used to do case development and to articulate a case for support. It's typically thought of as a longer narrative document, 10 or 15 pages. They can be longer. For the decades, kind of the formative decades of our profession, this is what people were doing to express a case for support. We feel like you don't have to use that specific format. There's nothing magical about it. We would recommend that you use a vehicle for case development and for answering these questions. Use a vehicle that suits you. We'll come back to this at the end, but three things that we like to do in our communications team. We will typically not write a 15-page case statement, but we will try to distill all of the key messages into a one-pager or a set of frequently asked questions, or you might think of this as a cheat sheet or your elevator speech. what I love about that is that it forces you to commit to clear, simple ideas. It's funny, you feel like writing a 15-page narrative case statement, that feels harder or bigger or like it's more serious. I actually think the challenge of writing a really good one-pager is actually harder and more rigorous than writing 15 pages, because you're at 15 pages, there's room for everything. You just throw it all in there. You know, every idea that someone suggests, sure, we'll fit it in. You end up with a document or an expression of your case that can be very unfocused. It can give you this ability to dodge this basic duty that we have to be clear about what we're saying and to commit to it. So a one-pager will not let you get away with that. A case brief is just sort of a shorter approach to a narrative case statement. We'll do these in a 4-page format or 6 or 8 pages, sometimes shorter. You know, so you're bringing in copy, stories, statistics. You can design it. This is something you could use as a leave behind, but it's meant to be, instead of a purely narrative, really long case statement that is kind of only for internal use, this is meant to be something that you could put in a donor's hands. The final vehicle or approach that we use is actually a presentation deck, and we actually do this probably the most of all of these options. Our team loves to use a presentation format as the main vehicle for establishing the case, because it forces you to speak out loud. You know, it forces you to use language that you could say out loud. You're gonna have to stand up and say it to someone. So you're automatically in more of a conversational register versus a written language register. And that's really useful because, again, so much of fundraising comes back to major donor conversations. So if you want language that's going to work in conversation, it helps to start in a conversational format. And we'll talk in the 4th webinar in the series about fundraising materials that work. We'll actually go through some examples of this. So I hope you'll join us for that. So that's why we think you should spend time on this and care about it. Let's go back to that taxonomy of what the case needs to do to engage and inspire, to create a rationale, and to remove obstacles. Assuming you've decided that you do care about your case and you want to invest some time and thought into it, how do you actually build it? So we're going to take each of these 3 jobs and dig into them a little bit more. Starting with the fact that your case needs to engage and inspire people. So think about the basic situation of most people out there. They might be aware of your organization on some level. They may even give to you at sort of an arm's length. You know, they make a gift just somewhat without a really strong engagement with what you're actually doing. Meeting them where they are and bringing them in to a greater level of curiosity or engagement or investment in your mission is kind of the first job of the case. And so it begins with really to meet them where they are. You have to understand who they are, where they are, who is that person on the other end. So when we're working with clients to build a case for support, we start by thinking about who is that person and what do they know and where are they right now. And we'll start by asking some questions. Bring together a group of your staff, your board, some of your, a focus group of stakeholders, people who maybe are small donors, maybe just people, anyone you can get in a room, and ask them what they know and how. Ask them in a really unguided way to talk about your organization. Ask them, why do you care? What's a memory that you have about this organization? What do you remember the first moment that you learned about us? Or what was the moment when you decided to give, and what was the thought that you were having when you made that change? Or just have them tell you a story. You know, is there a specific experience they had, an event they went to, someone on your staff or one of your clients that they met, where that story is what drives, just stands out in their memory. So what you're trying to do is just figure out, where are people and what is the version of our organization that exists in their mind? Getting out of the staff perspective, all the things that we know about ourselves, what's in their heads? And then when you look at what they say, what they're actually telling you, it can be really interesting. So first of all, you look for where's the energy. What are the areas where people are actually getting engaged or getting animated, or the energy level in the room or in the conversation is rising. Look at what they're really saying. What points do they keep coming back to? Is there an idea that you hear 3 different people say, and they maybe all be using different words, but they're all expressing the same idea? Anytime you see that, that's a flag that some part of your case lives there. On the flip side, what are people not talking about? And that can be really surprising. We actually just did this message testing and case research project for a client that they had been basically using 2 master messages over the last 5 or 10 years. That's what we found when we looked at their materials. There were kind of these 2 dominant messages that kept coming up. So we went out and we did some focus groups. And what we found was that everyone in the focus groups reflected, in their own words, reflected back to us a version of the first message, and they kind of never talked about the second message. So that we're like, okay, that's interesting. It looks like one of these messages is connecting and the other isn't. We weren't quite sure about it, so we did a survey. And the survey, we actually put different messages against each other and tested them against each other, and then it became really clear. One of these messages was working very well, and the other was just not connecting because it didn't connect to what people cared about that organization. So again, we just having to set aside your own sort of biases and perspectives and look at what people are actually saying. And it may be a little bit off center from what you expect. Another way we like to do this, this is an exercise that our team does all the time with clients. If you're a client participating in this webinar, you may have seen a version of this. So we call these eye exam questions because it's like when you go to the eye doctor and they put the things on your face and they say, okay, which is better, A versus B, A versus B, then B versus C, and you know, that whole thing. So we do that with stakeholders. We'll get, we love to do this with boards in particular, or campaign steering committees, those kinds of groups, but you can do it with the staff, you can do it with anybody. So we'll just put up really simple little dichotomies. Do we see our case as being more emotional or rational? Is it more about the big picture of what we're doing overall, or is it more compelling to talk about specific projects? Is the energy more about the big picture, or you know, the genius of these specific programs and projects? Does this case, should it feel more energetic and activating, or is it more weighty and gravitas and serious and, you know, more about the serious weight of the mission? Another really simple one is, is it more about the threat or the aspiration? Is it more of a fear or a hope-based case? And sometimes you put these up and well, let me say this. Anytime you put these up, you are guaranteed conversation. You will never hear crickets when you put this kind of thing up. Now, what people might say is, oh, that's a false dichotomy, you know, that it's actually both, or these aren't really opposed to each other. And that's actually fine, because then they're talking. Then they have to tell you why. You know, all I'm saying is these are guaranteed to get your people talking in ways that are really revealing and useful. Another way that we'll do that is to, you know, it's kind of a similar exercise. We were working with a you know, ask people to look at 3 different options for how to frame your case. We were working with this national organization that they run programs in high schools across the country that prepare young people for skilled trades and skilled professions. So they're an amazing organization, but you can talk about because of the work you do, you could talk about it in 3 different ways. You could talk about it in terms of what it's doing for the students, preparing them for great careers in skilled professions. Talk about it in the benefits to businesses locally. This is a talent pipeline for all the local businesses. They have a stake in this. They should invest. Or you can look at like a macro level. You hear about the skills gap in the American economy, that, you know, we have job openings that we can't fill across the macro economy because there's just this gap between the skills we need and the skills that people have. So all of these 3 framings, it's not immediately obvious which one you should use, but they set up the case pretty differently. In this particular case, it turned out that the middle box, the benefit to businesses, especially because they were the primary donor audience, was far and away the winner. But think about, for your organization, what would your version of this be? What are some different ways that you could talk about your case, and how would you differentiate between which is more effective? Because the one thing you want to be careful of is trying to do all three at the same level of emphasis. If you find your case has this like, and also this, and also this, and also this kind of energy, where you're trying to cram so much into it, and there's always one more point you want to make, that's usually a cue or a clue that that this kind of exercise would be useful to say, okay, we got a lot we want to say, but what do we lead with? Ultimately, you're trying to get to this question of why do people give? So this feels like the basic question. The thing is, like, this is not really a question that is all that useful to ask in most cases, because it's just too direct. You have to ask people to talk about your organization, or choose between options, or you have to give them a little more guidance to get at the heart of this question versus just asking it directly. So that's your first job of your case, is to engage and inspire people, to connect with them where they are and to bring them in. Second job is to create the rationale. So let's say we've done our first job, someone's paying attention, they're leaning in, they are interested, they want to learn more. How do you create the framework in their mind, kind of the story that they're going to tell themselves about why it's good for them to invest? They need to justify that decision to themselves, and we would like to help them with that. So here, the approach that we typically take is a very organized and kind of rigorous approach to think about 6 elements that go into a case for support. I'll let you take a look at these for a second. As a pretext for me to take a drink of water. So there are, you could probably slice this up different ways. This is the way that the Campbell and Company communications team uses, approaches this question. And these elements, they look different in every different case. They don't always have to go in a specific order. We'll see that as we go along. And they don't always have the same amount of priority. You might have a little of one and a lot of the other. You know, but typically in a case that really feels complete and feels like it's working and you've anticipated the kinds of challenges that someone might raise to it from different angles, usually once you get to that place of strength, you're doing something in each of these 6 areas. And so we'll start with the context, setting the context for your case. And here, we're just beginning from a very basic principle, which is that context actually creates meaning. You can't have, meaning does not exist outside of context. So here's another dumb illustration. So here's a shape, and one question I might ask you is this large or small? Is the shape big or small, and is it light or dark? How about now? That shape, the shape on the right. Is the shape on the right large or small, and is it light or dark? How about now? We're obviously looking at the same shape. Okay, you didn't come to this to look at rectangles. Let's look at some words. Let's say that your context, you're trying to create the broader context for your mission. So you run an arts program for children in a city. So the context around you is that due to budget cuts, nearly 400,000 children in our schools now face an education without the arts. So that's your context, and then what you're putting out there is your sort of vision is, with your support, we will grow our children in the arts program to reach 5,000 kids in the years ahead. When I look at that, I think the thing on the right feels small, because you got 5,000 next to 400,000. It feels like we're saying, you know, give us some money and we'll put a tiny dent in this problem. So I'm going to leave the thing on the right the same and just change the context. Over the last 5 years, we've built the city's most exciting new arts education program, delivering measurable impact for every child as we've grown to reach 1,000 children every year. Now, with your support, we'll grow that program to reach 5,000 kids in the years ahead. So all I've done here is change the context, but now this feels bigger. And by changing the context, what we did was we actually changed this from kind of a quantity thing to a quality thing. We're not talking about the 400,000. We're talking about that this may not be the biggest program, but it's the best. It has the most measurable impact. It's new, it's exciting, it's innovative, and we've grown it to reach 1,000 children every year. And next to that, growing to 5,000, that feels huge. So sometimes setting context can be a little bit counterintuitive because it feels like this is the more obvious thing to say. And this is the kind of thing that maybe everyone knows, right? Everyone knows that arts education funding is in crisis, so we want to say that, right? This is why it's worth not just taking your context for granted, but really thinking about what is going to set you up to deliver the most meaning around your mission. So we'll show you a few other angles for looking at this. One is to just kind of think about it in terms of what stage you're playing on. We see this with lots of different kinds of organizations. I think of universities. Say you are a public university. We would call like a directional university, southeastern whatever state. And so you are far and away the biggest game in town for your local region. You are the main hub of education and probably also employment in a large, mostly rural community, let's say. If you're that university, you can absolutely play on the local stage and say, we are enormously significant to this community. What we see a lot of organizations or universities like that trying to do is to say, we're a global leader. We're not. It's not good enough for us to just be hugely existentially significant to a half of an entire state. We want to talk about how we're a global leader in X, Y, or Z. And every time I see that kind of messaging, I feel like how does that? Are we picking the wrong stage? Did we just take something that is in fact really significant and make it feel like just another, I don't know, global player in some way? And is it credible? And is that what people want from you as the local, tentpole institution for education and career training? So think about what stage you're playing on. It might be geographic. It might be more about, are you serving, your existing community or a broader community? Are you serving your patrons and the people who come to your theater and come to your shows, or are you thinking more of your mission in terms of the broader community? And it's just not always the case that bigger is better. What you're looking for is the stage where your work feels most meaningful. Another way to look at this, which is very, very simple, is just how would you create a little backstory to the work that you're doing right now? So let's say our school is great today because every generation of parents and alumni has stepped up to invest in making us stronger for the next generation. So now it's our turn. You're just taking whatever it is this school is doing. I haven't really specified it here. You're just creating a little bit of backstory that says we're not just doing this because these are good projects to do today for immediate benefits. We're part of this broader story. There's this broader context that puts a little bit of a sense of responsibility on you. Your kid at this school today, part of the reason it's a great school is because a generation ago, other parents invested in it. So you're part of that context, and there's a responsibility that comes with that. So these last few slides have just been showing you a few different ways to think about context. Once you've got that, the next piece of the equation is what we call the impetus statement, which is a kind of a funny word, but it's very specific to what we're trying to do here. And the core insight is that when we think about fundraising, the enemy is usually not competition or what the other organization down the block is doing, or what even the other university in town or hospital in town. Sometimes we think in a competitive mindset when the real enemy is just apathy and inertia and people just not paying attention. So, so with the impetus piece of the case, you're trying to dislodge people from their basic habit of not giving to you. There's all these people who, or maybe they're giving it at a low level, you want them to give more. Maybe they're not giving, you want them to start giving. We're very habitual creatures. What would possibly get someone to change that behavior? It's not just us making a really logically sound case. There has to be something that kind of breaks that inertia. So we have to think about this in a few different ways. One is to think about what's driving this case or driving your organization. What is creating a sense of urgency now that is different than just the basic merit of investing in your case? So you can go a few different ways with this: threat-based framings, opportunity-based framings, more of a sense of responsibility. You're trying to find something that puts a little bit of a charge into your case. And what's interesting is that the framing you choose for the impetus kind of shapes the overall feeling and direction and tone of your case in an interesting way. So one way to do that is also just to think about how would you create a sense of a moment around your case, especially if it's a campaign. You basically need a sense of moment if it's a campaign, but even outside of a campaign. So we will actually get in front of boards or campaign steering committees and put these little sentence starters up on a slide and just give people 5 minutes and play the Jeopardy music and just have them fill things in and see what they say. You're taking the assumption that there's something urgent, there's a moment that we're trying to create. Another way to look at this is really to think about your vision. So I think every case, and especially campaign cases, need to have an expression of what it's all about, or what the larger vision is that is existing on a higher level than your specific fundraising projects or initiatives or your wish list. So the question here is really, what does it all add up to? And here, these are another set of little sentence starters that we will use with clients, with staff, with boards of directors. Ask them to fill this in. This campaign, maybe we're investing in a building and some endowment and some scholarships and some program funds or whatever. There's stuff in the case, but what does it all add up to? What is this all about? Or if someone could only remember one thing about what you're doing, what would you have that one thing be? Or if you picture how the world will be different after this campaign, what is the simplest way to express that difference? So here's a few examples from some projects from the Alzheimer's Association. We see a day when no family faces Alzheimer's disease. That's a vision statement. This campaign ensures that our singular approach to theater will always have a home in our city. I can picture that. Our vision is that no child should miss out on a great education for financial reasons. These are all just simple examples. What they have in common is that I can write them in a single line. You can picture them in your head. You could probably remember them and say them to someone if you were having a conversation later today and you were invested in any of these organizations. And they capture that question of what's different after we make this investment. So when you're thinking about vision statements, sometimes this is a term you can use in a lot of different ways. Sometimes people hear vision and they think we're talking about, a 30-year vision, and that can be it. Or it can be much more immediate and short-term. So the time frame is kind of up to you, and we'll just show you some examples. So again, the day when no family faces Alzheimer's disease, that to me, that's like JFK saying we're going to the moon. That's a vision that's on a longer time frame at a broader scale. Down in the left corner, you see, to be able to accept every qualified scholarship applicant next year. That's a vision. That's a you can picture it. It's specific. It shows you what's different relative to now. But it says next year. So that's a 1-year vision versus a 10, 20, 30-year vision. In the middle, we have one from a public media organization that was working to set a new standard for local journalism that strengthens their community. So they had some initiatives to back that up, and it was really probably, I would say, about a 5 to 7 year vision. but you can see what they're trying to communicate that's different and that expresses a sense of vision. Next piece of the puzzle is what we call the credential statement. And really the question here is, why are you the right organization for the job? If I care about, ending Alzheimer's, or improving local journalism, or giving educational opportunity to children who should have it, if you've convinced me that that's important, why should I do that with you? And there's a few different ways to approach this. It can be, you can frame this in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's about your uniqueness, that really no one else is positioned to solve this, or that the community or the world really needs us to do this because of our unique role. It could be just about the fact that we do it better. There might be 5 people working on this, 5 organizations working on this issue, but we have the best outcomes, or we're the ones who are always rethinking our program and strategy. Sometimes it's more about integrity, or the sense of, that there's a sense of trust in your organization because of the way you do your work. We've had clients who say things like, we take on the cases that other organizations won't take on, or we are, mission driven in everything that we do, and they can back that up with some proof points and stories. So sometimes it's more a sense of trust. Like, we're not necessarily saying we're unique or maybe the most effective. We're saying you can trust us. Or just simply a sense of building on strength. With educational institutions, this is often what you're framing around. People who care about that school or college or university will have us be motivated by a sense that they're building on strength. As you think about what your credential for your case is, it's also really helpful to look for examples that say it all. So let's share just a couple from some of our clients that I just thought I thought they were cool. So this is from public media. When the recession hit and media outlets across the country faced extraordinary new pressures, some of them failed, some of them cut back, and others went into opinion and entertainment to stay afloat. But we decided to go all in on serious journalism. This was an absolutely true statement that absolutely distinguished this particular public media station, not only in its local market, but also made it stand out as a recognized leader in the world of public media nationally. So kind of a perfect little proof point. When our elected leaders wanted to initiate a citywide discussion on police community relations, they turned to our university to lead it, to host it, to facilitate the panel, to bring that together. So just that's, this is in the context of a university, obviously is doing 1,000 different things, but you're looking for those little examples that kind of prove what your credential is. Second to last element of your case, the plan. The challenge here is just to be as concrete as you can about what you're doing. So if you have, once you've expressed your vision, which we were talking about just a minute ago, how do you then show or demonstrate that you're going to deliver on that vision? And this is really about connecting your vision to a specific set of initiatives or projects. In a campaign context, this is all about, what is your campaign funding and how do you make the case for it? If you're not in a campaign, it's really about expressing, what are we excited about that we're doing over the next few years? If you invest in us today because of our mission or because of our vision, what kinds of projects or programmatic initiatives are special priorities for us, or are just interesting things that we're doing that will help support. Now, one thing I find that we often need to discuss with clients, especially when they're going into campaigns, is the fact that you don't have to have every single detail nailed down. You don't have to know you don't have to have the complete floor plan for your new building before you go out and raise money for it. But it is really helpful to be able to say what the top few or 5 here benefits are. So here's an example. This was from a theater that is a really significant community theater in a community that didn't have a tremendous amount of performing arts resources, but they had this one great theater that had been there for years, but it was really literally falling apart. We decided not to make the case about the fact that it was falling apart and probably kind of dangerous. We've decided to sell the benefits, and they didn't know yet what the square footage, they didn't have the blueprints yet, but we knew that no matter what the blueprints were or whatever the details were, it was definitely going to do these 5 things. And these are 5 things that were guiding the whole plan. And I won't read them to you, you can see them, they're self-explanatory. But if you can be specific about what you're going for, most of your donors will, that brings them along. And then if they have further questions about the details, they can ask. And frankly, once they're asking those kinds of questions, you're probably in a pretty good situation. Finally, with the appeal, this is a part of the case that is actually kind of easy to forget, even though it's maybe the most, I mean, this is the ask, right? This is kind of what it's all about. But sometimes we forget that the ask itself can take on a lot of different shades and flavors. So you're not just asking them for money, you're asking your donor to do something, to be something, to play some specific role, to play some, to take some part in this broader story that you're creating with the rest of your case. So you got to take a minute to think about what that really is. And there are lots of different versions or variations on this. It can be about certainly be about giving back. That's pretty obvious. It can be about leaving a legacy. It can be about leadership. If you're a donor to this kind of initiative, you're the kind of person who is leading the community forward through your philanthropy. So part of what you're doing with the appeal is, how do we want the donor to be able to see themselves or think about themselves? How do we make them the hero of their own story in the way that we all are in our lives? Maybe it's more about being part of the solution. This is an interesting framing I like. There are certain kinds of organizations where part of the appeal is really the fascination of how ingenious or innovative or smart the organization is. Especially, we work with a lot of environmental organizations, and what we find is that in a conservation organization, the scientific staff, the science people, are the rock stars, and the donors, in a lot of cases, are really drawn to this sense that they're being part of this really sophisticated science-driven effort to save, to benefit the environment. So that sense of being part of the solution, like you're coming in on the inside of this really innovative thing. It can be just a simple join us, like a communitarian. This is us. This is our responsibility as a community to take care of the next generation or of our stakeholders. Or it can be, really values-driven. Certainly, a lot of religiously affiliated and driven fundraising. You want to anchor in something like that. So, and of course, this is going to be different for different donors, especially at a major gift level. You're never going to find one thing that fits everyone. But at some point, you do have to, if you're going to print a brochure or something, you do have to write the ask in some format and figure out which is kind of the best one for you overall. So different ways of thinking about that. So we've just walked through the 6 elements of your case. Kind of where are we? Why is this urgent? What's going to be different? Why us? What do we actually do with your gift? And what are we asking you, donor, prospective donor, to do? So these are the elements. And like I said at the beginning, they can weave together in different ways. We put them in this one order here, but there's nothing especially magical about that order. So we're going to show you just a really simple example. This is just a kind of a paragraph. So it's time to build a permanent home for our theater. So there we're leading with a little bit of a vision statement. The vision is permanence. What's different is that they've been renting, but now it's going to be permanent. So that's the vision statement. Time to build a permanent home for our theater. Over 25 years, we've come to play a role that no other theater in Chicago can play, producing work that brings the power of theater to the social and political questions of our time. So a little bit of a credential statement there. You're saying what makes you unique. And as we look at the challenges that our communities face, from segregation and distrust to violence and poverty, we see that the power of theater to bring us together and open up conversations has never been more urgent. So you're setting some context, but I think that also maybe puts a little bit of a charge into it from a little bit of the impetus. So we're ready to take our mission to the next level, but our current home in a rented storefront space cannot take us there. So there's your impetus, much more specifically framed. It's like a problem solution kind of framing. That's why we're launching our new campaign to build a permanent home for our mission and a new home for theater in our community. So that's really, again, expressing the vision. Our new home will take our artistry to the next level, open up new ways of engaging our community, and ensure that we can continue our 25-year record of sound financial management. So you're getting the plan there a little bit. This is, I mean, not in a lot of detail, obviously, but you're starting to see the plan. And we snuck in a little bit more credentialing there with just bragging a little bit about how they're actually well run, and you should trust them with a $1 million gift. So join us today to help lead the conversation that our community needs. So you as donor, you're having a certain sense of yourself as playing a facilitating conversational role in a community. So I don't think this example is amazing. I just think it weaves together the elements in a really kind of typical sort of way. And you can see how they don't have to go in a specific order, but as long as, and this is obviously, I don't even know how many words this is, it's not very many, but the fact that it touches on all 6 of these things makes it feel, it has a sense of completeness to it, even though there's obviously much more detail you could add. So when we talk about creating a rationale, that second job of your case, that's what we're talking about, building those 6 elements together in a cohesive framework that sets you up to tell a story. Third and final job that your case needs to do is to remove obstacles. All those things that a donor can get hung up on, and it really only takes one. So we're thinking, in the case development process, we're thinking ahead about what are the questions people are going to raise, what are the challenges that they may, the objections, what are they going to need to know? And our mascot here in the lower right is Ganesh, the placer and remover of obstacles. So this is really specific to what organization, this is really specific to who you are and what you're doing. So if you're a food bank, this is going to vary substantially based on whether you're talking about your small dollar donors or your major donors. So what are the obstacles or objections or questions that people might raise? For a small dollar donor, it's pretty minimal. They want basic information. They want to know who you serve. They may want to know how many meals does my gift buy? And I raise that question because maybe you may not like to think about it that way. Like you may not want to, you may not like to present your work in terms of that kind of a transaction. All we're saying in removing obstacles is just know that somebody's probably going to ask that or have that question in their head. So you can answer that question head on, or you can come up with your clever way of evading that question if you don't really want to frame it that way, or moving on to a different framing. The point is just to anticipate that that's a question someone's going to have. With a major donor, the questions get more challenging. Why do you need $1 million gift from me instead of my annual gift of 100,000 or 20,000 or whatever, 500, whatever it is? They might ask, okay, I'm happy to give you $1,000 a year, but if you want me to give $25,000, I need to know how you're not just helping people day to day, but how are you actually helping people get out of poverty? So now we're starting to get some tough questions, and you probably have a thought or an answer about this. But we got to know that question's coming. So that, or what is your theory of change? Like how, that's kind of the smarty pants version of the second question. If you have some smarty pants donors, you probably do. So depending on the level of donor, the questions are very different. The extreme of this is what we see when we work with a lot of independent schools, where the parents they're probably the highest information demands of any constituency group in the nonprofit sector. They're your best friends, but they're also, they're the most amazing, loyal, they'll do anything for the school, but they also expect everything in terms of information. So when you're going to, an independent school community with a project, you got to be ready for just about every possible question that you're going to get, down to, is the construction dust from this new project going to be a problem? And all my independent school clients and people out there know what I'm talking about here, but it's just knowing what questions are coming and thinking ahead to them. The other good thing to do in terms of removing obstacles is just go test your case. You can do this a lot of different ways, some of them more formal, some of them more informal. You can just have one-on-one conversations. You can do group focus groups. We talked about that earlier. Do electronic surveys, that's easy. You can do a market study, a campaign planning study, feasibility study. That's what, that's a lot of the work that we're doing day to day is working on feasibility studies for campaigns to try to test a case and get answers to these kinds of questions. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this, from informal to formal, from low commitment to big investment, and any way that you do it, it's most important that you just do it. And don't overestimate don't feel like, well, if I can't do a big rigorous survey or set of scientifically valid focus groups, then I shouldn't do it. Actually, just having even a few conversations, you can get a lot of what you need in just the first few conversations or even the first bit of engagement. So okay, let's recap what we've talked about today in the last few minutes here. We're thinking about your case as a set of messages that prepares your prospects for a solicitation. So it has 3 jobs to do. You've got to meet them where they are, bring them in, you've got to give them a rationale for why they might give, and you have to think about the obstacles that they might raise and try to anticipate those. As you do that, there are 6 elements of your case that you want to try to check these boxes and think about your case from each of these angles and answer these questions. Now, one thing that I think is probably extra clear now that we're at the end of this webinar is that all I've really been talking about for the last 57 minutes is just questions. I've been asking you questions to ask yourselves. We haven't really been talking about what to write or what kinds of, we haven't talked about documents. We've been talking about just answering questions, and that's what's at the heart of case development. So to go back to that point at the beginning, you don't need to do that in a particular narrative format. Whatever vehicle you choose, whether it's a presentation or a shorter narrative or a one-pager, it's truly a vehicle. It's a vessel for you to go through this process of answering questions and working them out in some kind of writing. And so, it's truly just a vehicle or a means to the end of answering these questions. So this is our first webinar focused on defining your case, nailing down those questions around what we're trying to express and communicate. Here's how we're going to go forward from this. In the next webinar, number 2, this is in December. This is actually my favorite one, number 2. This is how we express your case, and it's all about messaging, taking the ideas that the answers to these questions from today and crafting them into, this is where we talk about writing, how to frame messages, how to write for impact, how to use verbs and not adjectives, how differently a message can work if it's written powerfully versus weakly. So we'll look at a lot of examples there. That one's fun. Third, we're going to think about how you get your volunteers on message. Fourth, we're going to talk about the materials that carry your messages out into the world. And 5, looking at campaigns specifically. So I hope you've been asking questions along the way. If you have other questions, please do send them to me at my email address here. And what we'll do is take all the questions that are would be valuable for everyone to hear the answers to, and we'll record a little follow-up video and send that out next week. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. Hope you've enjoyed this. Hope you'll join us for the remaining sessions in our series.